Why should we consider growing winter wheat?
Well, there's a lot of benefits to it, and not just agronomic or marketing. I think you know, if there ever was an eco-friendly crop, I think winter wheat is one of them, and there's several reasons for that. But a lot of, for example, if you think about insect pests, there's many insect pests that will attack, for example, spring wheat, that winter wheat, because of its life cycle, can escape. So in terms of that, it can escape pests, it can escape some of the diseases. It's very, very competitive with weeds, so theoretically we can reduce our herbicide inputs. An example of that, as one example, we have a grower that plants his winter wheat behind clearfield canola and never puts on any herbicides at all. We routinely only put a little bit of fall 2,4-D down, and that's it. No spring in crop herbicides at all. So eco-friendly in that respect. When you think about spring runoff, or those conditions in the spring where it's very, very wet and things are soggy and your spring wheat is sitting there not doing much and definitely not able to take advantage of the moisture nor the potential nitrogen that's at risk to leaching. Winter wheat's different because it's this tall in almost a booting stage where it can both utilize the moisture and any of that residual N. And so those eco-friendly benefits don't just benefit the farm gate, but that's something that the whole Canadian public can benefit from. And so I think there's that. And then site-specific things to a farm would include things like you split that workload. So if you can split a workload and plant more acres with the same size of equipment, you don't have to expand your capital input. And so winter wheat planted at the fall, come spring, now you've got most of your wheat phases in the ground, and even though it's raining outside, you can just look outside and see your winter wheat plants instead of think, oh wow, how am I going to get my spring wheat planted, right? So that's one. At harvest, you've got earlier cash flow into that farm because this stuff's coming off way earlier than spring wheat, and typically you've got two choices. Even if it's a milling type winter wheat, you could sell it into a feed market, generate some fast cash injection into your business, or you can hold off and sell it into a milling market as you please. So there's a lot of flexibility with winter wheat as well in terms of marketing. And I think now with I think a bit of a renaissance with wheat in general, and with the expanded marketing options that we have, I think winter wheat is one of those market classes that's really poised to benefit.
Okay, so say I'm sold on winter wheat. Let's start right from stubble. What should I be seeding it into?
Well, we recently published a study on that, and definitely winter wheat will respond differently depending on the stubble. And so there are some considerations within your rotation that you need to think about. Ideally, canola was one of those ones that was the no-brainer because it's harvested fairly tall. You got this tall stem that's great at trapping snow. However, as we've tried to chase yield in our canola phase, what's happened is we're planting varieties that mature a lot later, because that's basically how we're getting the yield benefit these days. And so it's not as compatible, particularly in shorter season environments like it used to be. So we looked at other things, and one of them was peas, which is particularly important for someone up in the Peace region as an example. And we looked at different cereal rotations as well. And the good news story there was that planting into canola, or pea stubble or barley silage stubble all gave the same winter wheat yield. So we do have alternatives to canola. The bad news is that if you were a farmer and you decided you wanted to plant into, say, something like barley grain stubble, the reality is, depending on your seeding equipment and general soil moisture and other conditions on the farm, you're probably going to take a bit of a yield hit on that.
Okay, so now we're getting into planting. What kind of seed density should we be thinking about?
I think that range right around 450 seeds per meter squared is where you want to be targeting. We're advising growers with spring wheat even to experiment with those high of rates. And so I think two things with your seeding is a high, trying to achieve a high plant population with a seeding rate of around 450. And then the other thing we're seeing with some of our other studies with seed treatments is that your seed treatment is going to give you a bit of an insurance policy to ensure you have a good stand establishment and you can protect that yield the following spring and summer.
When should we be considering seeding?
That's regionally specific, but generally we're in central and southern Alberta, and we've got a bit more flexibility with seeding dates. So, you know, ideally late August to mid-September would be the best. So as you get into the shorter season, you know, probably you want to be in the ground the end of August. But to be honest, down in Lethbridge, if you're seeding into October, it's generally not an issue. The only thing that's going to penalize you is you're going to lose the advantage of winter wheat coming off a lot earlier and having it being so asynchronous to some of these pests and diseases. So it's just going to mature a little later. You won't really suffer a major yield penalty until you start seeding really, really late. And that's going to put you at risk to possibly a little bit more winter kill. So as soon as you get outside of optimum agronomic system conditions or setting yourself up for a really strong agronomic system, it's those other things that become important to consider to compensate for that. So seed treatments, making sure you have a very high seeding population, checking your seed lot to make sure you've got very good seed vigor. Any of those that are a shortfall, either low plant populations or poor seed vigor, no seed treatment, that takes you from a very weak agronomic system to a very strong one if you had done something different. So those are, you know, this whole holistic strategy in terms of managing your wheat and basically any crop really comes into play.
And you mentioned earlier about the green bridge. It might be a concern for seeding too early. Can you explain that?
Yeah, that's a good point. So there's sometimes a question, well, I'm ready to go now, I've got a break in harvest, I want to maybe try and hit it and get some of the acres in now and earlier, you know, to mid-August. And the major concern for me is we're going to be doing a study where we look at some of these extreme seeding dates in more detail, but the concern is this green bridge idea. So there's a mite called the wheat curl mite that loves cereals and will hop from green plant to green plant. And if we provide what they call a green bridge from the spring wheats over to the winter wheats, that allows that curl mite to overwinter, and eventually it's going to vector a disease into the crop called wheat streak mosaic virus, which is essentially, you know, being a viral disease, it's almost impossible to stop. And so once it gets going, you know, it's only by the good graces of God that you can hope for it to stop at times, because some of the control measures, such as, you know, elemental sulfur, they either aren't practical or just haven't really been borne out by rigorous research. The one positive thing that if you were trying to push the seeding is there are varieties like Radiant that are resistant to the wheat curl mite, and so definitely you'd want to be considering variety selection in that case and trying to ensure you have something like Radiant as your variety, just to minimize that. If the wheat curl mite doesn't want to sit on that plant, it's not going to vector over the disease. So thankfully we've got a variety that'll mitigate that issue.